All right, looks like it's 1 o'clock, so I can go ahead and get us started. So today we're going to be talking all about court records. I'm Katie Stilp. I'm the local history librarian at Appleton Public Library, and this is our 9th session already. So we're going to dive deep into court records, but obviously before we dive in, I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand all the legal terms, so I'll do my best. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Need another copy?
So first, we will talk about why we should use court records in our genealogy research, because of course, that's not the first thing you think of when you think about your family history, right? But just remember that each time a person has interacted with a city, with a county, with a state, or a federal court, a record's going to be created. Well, obviously, we want to collect all of the records about our ancestors to be able to fill out what information we know and get some details on their life. So this is going to also help us place our ancestors in a specific time, in a specific place. And we can add this to our timeline that we've been talking about, how to add certain things to their timeline to figure out where they are and how to find other records then. This is also going to give us context for their lives, figuring out some additional details and, what their trials and tribulations were on a day-to-day basis, or what kind of events and things they might have been involved in. Court records are also really helpful in establishing family relationships and places of residences. So sometimes you get an address or a legal land description of where your ancestor was living, or they talk about, their spouse or their brother or their parents in a court record. You'd be surprised what kind of little nuggets of details you can find in court records. They might also list their occupation, a description of what they look like, and other excellent family history information. So you definitely don't want to skimp on using court records. The records are also going to help you see who's in your ancestors' fan club. So we say fan club to mean our friends, family, acquaintances, or associates and neighbors. These are all people who you want to look into further because your ancestor might appear in their records as well. So maybe this person was their neighbor, so they signed as witnesses for each other in certain things. They might also provide more insight into your ancestors' lives. Obviously, sometimes complicated things happen. That's why we find juicy things in court records sometimes. But even those things that aren't as juicy are still interesting to you and to understanding what your ancestor went through in their life. And then, of course, you obviously want to approach court records with a, understanding that there might be things in a court record that you might not want to know about your ancestor, or they might be put in a bad light. So you kind of want to proceed with caution and remember, hey, we all make mistakes, Maybe when I was a dumb kid, I did this thing and then I straightened out, and it is what it is. Absolutely.
There's now, what is that, 50 years before you can look at it. Does that apply to this too?
So there might be restrictions on court records. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, so the question was about restricting of court records and when they would be open to the public. So we're handle that today. Court records can also be used as an alternative record to help you fill in those gaps about your family. So for example, it might list a birth date of a minor child of that person when there weren't any birth records in existence at that time, or you can't find an actual birth record. It might talk about something like an involuntary commitment of a family member to a mental institution, and now you hadn't been able to find any admission paperwork, or those records were sealed or destroyed for whatever reason. Well, now it's letting you know that, hey, this happened, and it could lead you to additional resources that you're going to want to explore to learn more about their time in that institution. So our focus today is primarily going to be on US court records because, of course, that's, we have such limited time, of course, and I don't really know much about international court records at this point. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our US court system, and then we'll dive into some of the records that you might be able to find. So the US court system, if we go all the way back to colonial times, that's going to be based on the common law of England, because of course that's where the first settlers were coming from, and that's what they adopted as their legal system. And common law, if you're not familiar with that, that's based on what's called precedent, which is decisions that are happened in previous other cases that were kind of similar to that case. But what happens with common law is it could be superseded by what's called statutory law. And so statutory law are laws that are enacted by governing bodies. So common law was usually what was going on, but other laws could kind of overturn that common law, for example. Up until the Civil War time period, people were criminally prosecuted for crimes like gossiping, witchcraft, scolding a husband, being publicly disrespectful to a minister, and refusing to attend church services. So I'm sure all of us could probably raise our hand and say, we have maybe done one of these things. So just imagine if you would live in the Civil War time period, you could have been prosecuted and served jail time or had some other sort of punishment for that crime. And this is a really great reminder that, of course, laws change throughout time. So you're going to want to study the different laws that are in effect during that time period when your ancestor is living there and what laws are in effect at that time in that specific location, because laws can also depend based on where they live. Like obviously, our laws in Wisconsin are different than the laws in Florida, for example. Also, something that's really important to remember is that court isn't just for bringing those legal cases or our black sheep ancestor. It's not all going to be bad stuff on all of our ancestors. A couple months ago, we talked about naturalization. So that's the act of becoming that citizen of a country that you were not formally born into. So naturalization is also handled by the courts. So remember back to our naturalization talk to learn a little bit more about researching those records, of course, but those are all held by the courthouses. Divorces and land records are also something that's handled through the courts. So I'll talk a little bit about divorces a little bit later, but I also briefly mentioned it in our vital records talk, which was our second talk this year. And then we're going to dive a lot deeper into land records in November before we wrap up for the year. Probate's also a really common court case that maybe you've heard of. It's kind of when your ancestor dies, what happens with all their stuff. And because that's so important for us genealogists, we're going to dive into it very in depth next month instead of trying to cram it into this court record session. You also might want to know that local courts also issued license for specific professions. So things like lawyers, physicians, merchants, peddlers, the ordinaries, who did the public inns, the midwives, the ferry operators, and clergy. So if your ancestor was in one of those occupations, they might have some sort of licensing documents related to your ancestor and their employment. So that's another way that you can find them in these sorts of records. So like I said, we're primarily going to be focused on US court records, but more specifically, we're going to focus on what's available at the county level. There are various types of courts, and I'll kind of talk about all the different types in just a second. So where you're going to find your ancestor in these court records is going to depend on what types of cases that they were involved in and what time period, of course. So for example, if your ancestor made counterfeit money, like one of my ancestors we're going to talk about today, that is considered a federal crime because they are, ripping off the United States government, the Department of Treasury that's making the money. It's a federal crime to counterfeit money. So that's going to be tried in federal court. You're not going to be able to find those just by going to, the courthouse in Appleton if it's a federal crime. Of course, each jurisdiction is going to have its own restrictions and its own access limitations to all of the different court records. So again, you really want to become familiar with what's available and the area that you're researching in to determine what their restrictions are, where you can access things. Some things are online, some things are not online. So I'll show you a couple of examples today. But for example, if you're researching in colonial time in Pennsylvania, that's completely different than 1920 in Wisconsin. The laws are going to be different. The access is going to be different. Where you would go to find those records is going to be different. So it really depends on a case-by-case basis of your own ancestors, what time period and where you're researching, and are kind of talk you through how you would even start if you have no clue where to start looking for these court records. So we're diving into that today. So the court names and different jurisdictions of the county and the states may have also changed throughout the years, because that's just an extra layer of complication. Because remember, sometimes county boundaries change throughout time, you know. Obviously, the state of Wisconsin, when it was first organized in 1848, didn't have all the different counties that we have today. The boundaries changed, and different parent companies, you know, birthed different smaller counties all around the state. So one great resource that you can use to look at those county boundaries is going to be through Heritage Quest. So you can go to our APL website and go to Heritage Quest. And this is, again, free from home if you live in Wisconsin. If you don't live in Wisconsin, of course, check with your local library for access. But once you get right into Heritage Quest, it's really super easy. They've got what's called the Census Map Guide right here. It's the second option when you first get to the homepage of Heritage Quest. So this will show you all of the states in the United States. What you would do is you would just click on that state. So I can click on Illinois, for example. And I can see over here, the date is 1800. So this is what Illinois looked like in 1800. It's unorganized at this point. I can click on 1810 and I can see, oh, it's still kind of unorganized. It's basically one big thing. In the white kind of outline is what the current boundary is today. So as we continue kind of clicking on the different dates, now I can see, oh, look at all these different counties in 1840, for example, and what the difference is between the county boundaries in 1840 and what they are currently. So that's going to determine where you're going to want to research, because if your ancestor is in Marshall County, well, it looks different in 1840 when they might have been living there compared to, you know, 2024 at this point. So you're going to want to know, you know, maybe they live in part of it that's, you know, not part of that county anymore, or not part of the county at this time that they're living there. So you can do this with any of the states and go through all the different census years, you know, all the way back to up till about 1920, 1930 usually. You can see these various maps. And like I said, my advice kind of when you're like not sure where to start or not sure what the access is or where records are, if they're online or offline, or how to even understand the different types of courts, the different names of all the courts in an area, and what cases they might have heard, you want to start with the Family Search Wiki. So we've talked about this a few times throughout our sessions. This is kind of the really great starting point that gives you a really great overview of all of the things. So what you can do is you can put in that name of that state and the name court records, or the name of the country. So if you want to explore those international court records that might be available, you could search something like Sweden court records and get a Wikipedia entry through Family Search that's going to tell you all about how to research in that area. So for example, we go into that Family Search Wiki, it's a link in your handout, and then you just search by a different place and or topic. So like I said, you can put in Wisconsin court records, and I can go ahead and click search. And now here's a whole page that's going to tell me all about researching in Wisconsin court records, and I can read through. Sometimes they're really detailed. Sometimes they've got different links that you can click on and learn more. Sometimes they're just kind of short, a couple paragraphs or, you know, things like that. Or again, we could also do a different country. So I could type in Sweden court records up here and hit OK. And now here, it's going to link me to some online resources that they might have. It's going to talk to me about some different background, the different types of court cases, the different time periods, all this kind of great information. If I have never researched in Sweden court records, this is where I'd want to start to have a little bit of background information before I start diving into it. Because again, Sweden is going to be different than Wisconsin. Wisconsin is going to be different than Florida. Florida is going to be different than New York. It's all different every single place. There's also a really great book called Courthouse Research for Family Historians. It's a little bit old because it's from 2004, so about 20 years old. Obviously, a lot more records are online now than there were in 2004. And they might talk about things like CD-ROMs that we don't really use nowadays. But this is a really great kind of information that can dive a little bit deeper into what we can cover today. We unfortunately don't have a copy of it at the library, but you can put it on hold and get it sent to us at APL to check it out on your account. So I definitely recommend looking at it and exploring it more. I also recommend using Google. That's a great way to kind of get that first overview of understanding the different jurisdictions and the different courts that are available. So for example, you could search something like court jurisdictions, Wisconsin, or court system overview, Wisconsin, or court system, Wisconsin. So for example, that's what I did. I typed in court jurisdictions, Wisconsin, and I can see right here, our first result says court system overview, and it's from the Wisconsin court system. So I could click into it and then be brought in here where it's going to tell me what the municipal courts are, what the circuit courts are, and get more details. It sometimes has helpful little graphics to help you understand all this stuff. And you can kind of learn about how to research then in these specific areas before you start trying to dive in and understanding it all. So again, you could do this with any state, any country as well. There's also a really great site called Cindy's List. So this is kind of a genealogy focused area where it's going to provide you links of things that are relevant to a specific category. So each country has its own little area, each state has its own little area, and then she even breaks it down through more specific things. Like if I want to learn about the laws and statutes in Illinois, I can drill down that far and get all these different resources to then click on those websites and read and learn a little bit more. So I'll show you here. If you just go to cindyslist.com, it's a completely free site. So what you can do is you can scroll down to the bottom here and you can look alphabetically if you know, hey, I want to look in Wisconsin, or I want to look at adoption records. You can start with whatever alphabet letter seems most likely. Or you can also go up here to categories and start there and just say, tell me where to go. It's a free site, so there are going to be a couple ads that pop up, unfortunately, but that's how they make their money in order to make it free for us. So now I can see all the different A to Z categories that they've got and all the different countries. Like I said, there's different, starts with the continents and different countries. So I can scroll down to the United States. And now I can see all the various states, for example. So again, I can click on whatever state I wanted to research in. And now I can see all the different topics that are in this specific state. So if I wanted to look at birth, marriage, and death records in Illinois, or I wanted to look at census records, I can click on that. But for us, if we're talking about court records, there's this area for laws and statutes. There's an area for government, so city, county, state resources. So lots of really great areas that you can click on. And then again, she's got links here then that will tell you a little bit of a snapshot, like this is going to link me to resources for a specific area. This is going to tell me specific case places where I can go, some specific statutes, all these kinds of links that I can then click in to be brought to that resource and start researching. And again, there's all these international categories as well. So this is kind of after you do that family search wiki, this is another really great place to start diving into the different resources that are available for that specific area that you're searching. So we've got questions so far before we dive more deeper. Any online questions here? Scolding a husband. They would burn me at the stake. Yeah, I know. All right. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there are various levels of courts. So there's kind of three main levels of courts that we're going to talk about, all that have various named courts underneath those kind of umbrella larger courts. So like I mentioned earlier, there's something called federal court. So they're going to be cases that are involving violations of the US Constitution or federal statutory law. They also try cases that involve both federal and state laws, or cases between US citizens and non-US citizens. They, of course, have courts like the Supreme Court underneath the federal courts. They've got district courts, they've got tax court, they've got a court of appeals, they've got a bunch of different courts. I mean, I don't even know them all. I've got some links in your handout for how to obtain some federal case files, because that's a little more in depth than what we can cover today. And I think most of us aren't going to find many ancestors in our federal court cases, but you know, if you've got one of those ancestors that did something naughty like counterfeit money, you're going to find them there. Of course, then we've got state courts. So that's kind of the next level underneath federal. So they have appellate courts, they've got trial courts, and within those, they have superior courts and their local municipal courts. They have names for their courts like district court, family court, they've got a state Supreme Court, they've got a court of appeals, et cetera, et cetera. Again, every state's different. What they call it is going to be different. That's why you want to start with the Family Search Wiki, or you want to start Googling to learn a little bit more about the state court system in that area that you're researching. The majority of these state cases are going to be civil or criminal. So civil cases are going to be a violation of a law when an individual is harmed, such as property damage, or if somebody trespasses or commits libel. Usually one or more individuals or businesses are going to file suit against the other person or the other business to enforce their private rights or to receive some sort of compensation for that violation of their rights. So you might see like a court case heading of John Smith versus Joe Green. It's a person to person or business to business, something like that, where it's civil. The other one is going to be criminal. So this is going to be a violation of a law in which society is harmed or may be harmed, such as drunk driving, theft, murder, of course, is the common one we think of when we think of criminals. In these cases, it's usually the state or the people that are filing suit against that person who committed that crime. So you'll see the state of Wisconsin versus John Smith, for example, if it's more of a criminal case. And then that third level, which is kind of the one that we're going to really dive a little bit more deeper into, is going to be our local level, or what they call the municipal level. So these are going to be those lower level court cases that are usually held in a trial court, like a county court or a city or a town or village court, or a juvenile court, or what they call a common pleas court. Again, there's lots of different names for all the various courts depending on the type of case that they're trying. These county courts are also going to be the ones that are responsible for those various records, like those naturalization records or those registrations that we talked about, the land, the probate, all that kind of stuff. That's where we're really going to find most of our ancestors, is in these county court records. Again, various court types and different names of the courts. So that's why it's important to start at the local level and learn about the various, court names and what cases they try, and really dive into that time period that your ancestor is there. Just like the state court, they hear a lot of civil and criminal courts or cases as well. So very similar types of cases that they have at the local level. So I mentioned a couple different names of courts, like the Common Pleas Court, if you've never heard of that before, which, until I started doing genealogy research, I had no clue what the Common Pleas Court was. I've got a couple definitions for you here, like, hey, you might want to know what the circuit court is, or what the county court is, or what a court of inquest is. So I've got a few listed in your handout for you. Your ancestor, of course, could be in one of these types of cases or all of these types of cases. Again, it's going to depend on the different things that they were involved in. You won't know unless you look, and unless you familiarize yourself with what the names are in that specific area that they're living and where you are researching. And all kinds of different cases are going to be held at different named courts. And these are just some examples of the potential names of courts that you can find. Yeah.
What is the legal term for the word appellate?
I will show you a resource in just a second and we will look it up. Yeah. Because because yeah, all this legal jargon is very difficult. And like I mentioned, I'm not a lawyer. I have no clue. I don't even watch Law and Order, so.
I have a court case and has I think two family members in it. And one is an appellate. And I don't know if that means they father or son or.
Yeah, so there's a really great resource where if you have some legal jargon, I'm going to show you how to figure out what that legal jargon means in more easily understandable terms than what we can explain. So there might be a couple types of court records that you're going to look at during these court records that you want to research. So again, we're going to talk more in depth about wills and probates next month because that's such a great genealogy resource that we're going to dive really deep into it next month. But you might want to look for those divorce records. If there's some adoption or paternity or, bastardy is something that, was a common thing back in the day if somebody didn't want to, claim their child. The different licenses, like I said, for various different occupations. There's going to be land records or even property disputes that might be tried in the court cases. Again, we're going to talk really in depth about different land records in November. Naturalization, which we talked about a couple months ago. Maybe your ancestor had some debts and they were taken to court over those debts that they didn't pay, or maybe somebody owed them money and they took that person to court to try to get repayment of that debt. Guardianship, sometimes that happens if both the parents aren't able to care for their children, or perhaps they pass away and then they need to have a legal guardian appointed for those children. Those are going to be in the court cases. Maybe they were appointed to a public office. They might have some sort of records of those as well. And then of course, those criminal charges that we don't want to think of our ancestor in that light, but maybe they were charged with assault or murder or theft or some other criminal matter. You don't know what they were charged with or what happened until you kind of dive into that. So again, you want to kind of approach it with a sensitive eye and realize, we do make mistakes, and these are maybe some colorful things you might find out about your ancestor that you weren't anticipating. Of course, lots more different types of court records that you might locate on your ancestor. Again, it really depends on the different area that you're researching, what time period, and what they were involved in throughout their life. But again, most are going to be at that kind of local level, so that smaller kind of very local kind of county or city level for them. So, as we kind of alluded to just a minute ago, some court records, of course, tend to be more difficult to use compared to the other genealogy records that we've talked about, because number one, they're typically not very much available online. And if they are, they aren't always indexed or indexed very well. So we're going to look at a couple of examples today, and I'm going to show you, there's not a whole ton online. That's, the examples I'm going to show you are not going to be my ancestors this time because stuff's not digitized. It's what's easily accessible for you guys. Don't let that discourage you though, because with just a little bit of effort and a little bit of help from the staff that are at those repositories where you need to go to look at these court records, you're going to be able to locate your family pretty easily. And like I said, some of the great gems that you can find in these court records make that little bit of effort to have to go to a courthouse or go to a library to research these. It makes it worth it when you can find that link to a specific person, or break down that brick wall that you've been having trouble finding the name of somebody, or making a connection, or finding that hometown or something like that. You can find little details like that in these court records. And like we mentioned, they use those legal terms that we're like, I have no clue what that even means, or different abbreviations that I'm like, I have no clue what I'm reading. This is English, but I don't understand what that word means. So there's something called Black's Law Dictionary. They have a book form, or they have a website, which I feel is very helpful. So we can go to Black's Law Dictionary and you can type in appellate and click search. Appellate is pertaining to or having cognizance of appeals and other proceedings for the judicial review of adjudications. So that still sounds a little legal jargony. So you can kind of, search these other words, like what does adjudication mean? What does appeal? What are certain, words in here if you don't understand them all? You can also go here and look at an A to Z kind of legal dictionary. So right here, if you just kind of want to browse through some of the terms, you can click on whatever category you want and see like, oh, they define multi-car discount or monetary threshold or medical payments coverage and all this kind of stuff. Or again, you can come up to that search box and, search whatever phrase that you see, like guardian ad litem. I'm like, I have no clue what that means. You can put that in there. And then it's going to tell you, oh, it means the party the court deems responsible for an incapacitated, handicapped, or minor in court. Well, now I know what that means, and I can maybe understand the context around this type of record then when I'm seeing that phrase in a different court case that I'm looking at. Does that help answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. There's also Google, if all else fails, or if that, definition of whatever you looked at in the legal dictionary is still too complicated for you to wrap your brain around, try Google, because sometimes they're more better explain it in more layman's terms than, this legal dictionary might be able to for us. Some basic ones that you need to know, though, before you start diving into court cases is going to be who's the plaintiff and who's the defendant. So plaintiff, that's going to be the individual, the company or institution who is bringing the case against somebody else. So they're the one who initiates the case. They're the one saying, something happened to me, I'm going to go file a suit and get whatever I need back, or get my money I'm due, or, whatever else, whatever justice they needed. The defendant then is going to be that individual, that company or institution that is going to be the one being sued or being accused in a court of law. So the way I think of it as defend is in that word defendant. They have to defend themselves against whatever charges are being brought against them. I've got a couple other common legal definitions for you in your handout that you should kind of be aware of before you start researching, or to help you start researching in some of the various cases. But again, I can't list them all, or it would be 1,000 pages long in our handout. So use Google, use that Black's Law dictionary for those other legal terms that you come across that you have no clue what they mean, or you want to understand a little bit more to give you that context. So as we kind of touched on a little earlier, some things might be restricted. So there's, might be a certain time period that you might have to wait for certain court cases. Essentially, it's going to depend based on the jurisdiction, based on the type of case it is, based on the courts and what their, they set as their restrictions. So you really want to talk to the staff there. They're going to be able to tell you why it's restricted, or hey, this is how you can get special permission to look at this court case, because maybe you just need to prove that your family or that these people that are named in this court case have been dead for, 50 years or 20 years or whatever their threshold is. So you might see things like the cases involving guardianships, because those are minor children. They don't want to just let those open to the public, even if it might have been 50 years ago or 100 years ago, because maybe those people are still alive. Or adoptions, usually those sometimes are closed because of the sensitive nature of those. Anything that has those kind of sensitive pieces of information, like maybe they were institutionalized, they might, restrict those and to just immediate family members, for example. So here's an example of one that I was looking at through UW Green Bay. They have an area research center, which I'll talk a little bit more about a little later. But this is a guardianship case that's tied within a probate case of my ancestor, because both the parents of 10 kids died when all the kids were underage. So then, of course, through the probate process, they had to elect guardians for all of these kids. And you can see right at the top, it says this case is restricted. Well, this is my great-grandfather. He's been dead since the 90s. So what I did was I went to UW Green Bay and I said, hey, how do I get access to this record? Because I'd love to know what happened to all of these kids. I knew what happened to him because he was my direct ancestor, but I didn't know what happened to all of his siblings. So all I had to do was write to the circuit court and explain my situation. They mailed me a letter back like a week or two later that said, yep, you can have permission to look at this court case. I brought it to the archives and they said, sure, here's the court case. It was that simple.
Do you need any legal documentation?
For this one, I did not. Yeah, just a letter from the court granting me access to it. Yeah, so it's going to depend. Another example I have is I went to the Wisconsin Historical Society. They have, records from a state school that his older sisters attended as part of their, guardianship. They were restricted because, again, his sisters were minors at the time that they were admitted to the state school. So I just said to the archivist, like, hey, can I look at these records? They're related to my family. These women are long deceased. And they said, yep. But they made sure to block off the other pages and that I could not turn any pages other than the page that dealt with that person that I was looking at. So it's going to vary depending on the repository. Yeah.
So for the case of your grandfather, did you have to prove that you were the granddaughter?
Nope, I did not. Again, it might depend. Places might make you prove that you're family, or they might make you prove that this person is long deceased. I mean, this record's from 1904. I think they pretty much know that that person's gone now. But it depends on the time period and the different repository and what their restrictions are or legal obligations might be. But even if it's restricted, you still might be able to get access to it. Again, like I kind of alluded to earlier, they might have some really sensitive or unexpected information that you might not want to learn about your ancestors. So be sure to proceed with caution. Decide if you really want to research in court records or if you look at what kind of case type it is and say, I think I'm good. I'm not going to read that murder case that my ancestor might have been involved in, or, understand that, even in divorce cases, there might be things like abuse talked about because at a certain time period, in order to be granted a divorce, you had to have one of these specific reasons for getting a divorce. You don't know, is the wife telling the truth that she was abused, or what proof does she have, until you kind of dive deeper and look at the court record and determine for yourself, and just realize again, our ancestors made mistakes, we all make mistakes, things like that. So realize that this is possible, that you could find some things that you might not be prepared for before you dive into these types of records. But again, you can usually see the charge or what case type it is in the index before you start looking at that case file to get more details. So, hey, I might need to proceed with caution, or nope, I think I'm good not learning a little bit more about that one. Be aware though, sometimes if they've been in multiple cases, they might mention those previous cases in the specific case you're looking at, even if it's not related. It might be a burglary case, but they mention, oh, a couple years ago they were charged with murder. So sometimes there might not be an exact way around it, but you kind of get that little heads up a little bit before you dive deeper. We've got questions so far. Before we start looking at the different types, I'll show you a couple examples and where to find them. See if we got any questions online here. Let's see. Thanks, John, for sharing the handout link. Where do I find court records related to admission to Wisconsin mental hospitals? It's going to depend on the area your ancestor is living in Wisconsin. A lot of those admission papers for the mental hospitals are transferred to the Wisconsin Historical Society, though, if you're looking at admission paperwork. Roberta says there are many editions of Black's Law Dictionary. The older versions are better for researching older terms, so just be aware of that. There's multiple different versions of that Black's Law Dictionary. Why, since it was so long ago, would it still be under restriction? That's a good question. I don't know why they still restrict something. I mean, yeah, it's been over 100 years and it's still restricted at this point. So not sure why that case is still restricted, but I still got access to it. So I got what I wanted, I guess. All right. So now we're going to talk about the different types of court records you might come across. First, we're going to kind of talk about the things you might use to find a court case. So one of those things is called a docket book. They might also call them a register of action or a court calendar. Again, every place likes to say something different, but this is kind of the main term that I've seen from the majority of cases. But this is essentially basically a list of cases that are going to be heard by a specific court. So once a case is brought about that the person has filed to have this case, it's going to be placed on what they call the docket until that trial is going to happen. So it's basically like a preview of what the court is going to listen to at some point. So usually on these docket books, you're going to see the list of the plaintiff and the defendant, the date that that case is going to be heard, sometimes a specific date, sometimes it might just say spring term of a certain year. You might get a case file number, which is going to be really helpful if you want to dive deep and really get all the juicy details of that case. And then you can use that information to locate that case file and other records that might be related to that specific case. Docket books are usually going to be in chronological order. They might be indexed, but it might be harder to locate your ancestors unless you know a specific time period of when they would have been having a court case, because it's essentially like a table of contents for the different case files. So what you could do is if you know your ancestor lived in a specific area during a specific time period, start at that time period and just go through the docket books and see if you can find them. But some of them might be digitized and online, and maybe you could keyword search and see if you can locate them that way. Just be aware that most courts keep their own dockets. So, you know, you might have one docket book for one type of court, or some areas, if they are a little bit of a smaller community, they might put all the different courts in one specific docket book. So you might see the family court, the court of inquest, what else? Juvenile court, all in one docket book, or they might be each individual, their own docket books. So again, that's why you really need to understand how the records are done and what the different court names are of the area where your ancestor is living. These might also be called minute dockets. So some courts do that and kind of combine a docket book and a minute book, which is what we're going to talk about in just a second. And they might give you a little bit more details of what's happening with the case in these minute dockets instead. So I'm going to show you some examples. So these are all easily accessible online. So this is one from Georgia, I believe. Just a second, let me sign into Family Search here. This is from Morgan County, Georgia. This is the Superior Court Criminal Docket book. So you can see right at the top, we've got what term it is. So it's March 1840. You can see the various cases. So the state versus so-and-so, what the charge is, simple larceny, what happened, verdict. You can see, again, the different court cases, the different things that they're trying, when it's going to be tried, or when they're going to read the verdict, things like that. So you can see kind of like a brief snapshot of what it is and what's going on, what time period, and then be able to look at the different court cases in that time period then to learn a little bit more about this. Selling or furnishing a slave with whiskey is that charge. So you can see some of the different types of court cases these courts are hearing. So this is obviously during a time when they weren't allowed to, you know, give whiskey to those people. So you can see, sometimes they're very hard to read. Like I can hardly read some of these. Something about selling liquor without a license. That's what it looks like. So you can see all these various charges, misdemeanor offenses, things like that are in here. And like I said, this is kind of like the table of contents that you're looking at before you start diving deeper into this. Then something very similar is called a minute book. So this is going to be a brief daily account that is kept by that clerk of court for all the various actions that are taken by a court. So it's really similar to the docket books that we just looked at, but it usually provides more details. So when I think of minute books, I think of meeting minutes. So if you've ever been to a meeting of an organization that somebody's taking minutes, they're essentially kind of giving you a little summary of what's happening. So that's what these minute books essentially are. They're giving you a summary of what happens in that court case or whatever they're doing in the court that day. Again, it's going to usually have that name of that plaintiff and that defendant and that brief description of what action was taken. They're usually in chronological order and usually, unfortunately, not indexed. If they are not indexed, you're going to want to skim through the pages during a specific time period when your ancestor was living there, or if you know they had a case during a specific time. You might be able to find out what time period through the dockets that we just looked at, or maybe there's some newspaper accounts talking about them being in court during a specific time period, or maybe other court records have led you to a specific time period where you can look at a more narrow time period than just the 40 years or 50 years they might have lived in a specific area. Just like those docket books, sometimes each court took their own minutes. Other times all the courts had their just one big minute book for all of the various courts in that area. And it might have changed throughout different time periods. Again, depends on the jurisdiction and how they handle their court records. So for example, maybe you have a minute book for all of the county courts that are going to have those civil suits, those criminal cases, the settlement of the various estates through probate, all that stuff. Plus, they might have some or all of the following things like appointments of office holders, or the issuing of business licenses, or reports and petitions, or coroner's inquests, or guardians, apprenticeships, stock marks and brands, all this kind of stuff, land stuff. So you might get a whole mishmash of all of the things in these minute books that you would have to weed through to kind of figure out if your ancestor is in there or not. So here is an example of a minute book from Culpeper County, Virginia. This is again available for free on Family Search for you. So you can kind of see just a little snapshot of what they look like. If you zoom on in, you can see this following list of people. They filed more than 30 days without exception, thereto being taken, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what they are doing. Oh, I think this is related to probate. It looks like administering probate. So these various people are being appointed to administer various probates. This is person being appointed as a guardian, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can see like little, oh, the last will and testament of so-and-so was brought forth to the court. So you can see just like a little paragraph or a little sentence or two about what various things are going on in the court that day. And again, it continues on the next page and you can see, oh, this plaintiff came with their attorney and so, this is what happened. So it's again, kind of like a day by day, case by case, kind of just a little summary of what happened at that time period. Then we might want to find some court order books, or they also call them judgment books. So this is going to list the specific judgment or what happened, or what the court is ordering to happen based on the contents of the case. So again, it's going to usually include some sort of brief description of the case and then what the judgment is. Like, oh, they're ordered to pay, or they're ordered to go to jail, or what happened. Some are recorded in court orders, and then they aren't found in other court records because, you know, maybe it's just an appointment of a guardian and it was a simple open and shut case. Or maybe it was just, oh, they are granted citizenship. And that's just the little one sentence notation saying that that's what happened. They're usually indexed, thankfully, but the index might be pretty limited. So again, depends on the various courts and how they are handling their records, how detailed they are in their records. Just like the other ones, sometimes each court has their own book. Other times a bunch of multiple courts might be in one book together. Some courts also have separate judgment books from order books. So sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes they're different things depending on the size of the court. So a judgment book might have something more extensive than the order books, or it might have a more extensive summary of what happened in the case and what happened, or what the final resolution was. So I've got an example of one from Warren County, Kentucky. Again, freely available on Family Search. So if you've got ancestors there, you want to check these out. So you can see the order books. This is the grand jury reports the following after examining witnesses, blah, 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 blah. So you can read all this fun legal jargon stuff. This day, this person came and produced his settlement. You can see on this motion, they ordered the defendant bond be reduced to $100. This was dismissed and remanded to the grand jury. So you can again see kind of that little snapshot. So sometimes they're typed, sometimes they're handwritten, or a mixed mash of both, depends on the time period, depends on that jurisdiction. But you can see kind of similar to those minute books, essentially, that it's kind of just giving that little description of what happened or what the final resolution was to a specific case. So you might not find a ton of details in these books, but what you really, really want is the case file. So this is going to be that packet or a bundle of all the loose documents of a court case. Like it might have copies of different evidence or testimony from the various witnesses, or if your ancestor needed to have a bond or was deposed and had to, say their side of the story, or there's various correspondence between people that they have a copy of in there, or various petitions that they made to the court about their case. So these are details that are really, really specific to that specific case, and it's not going to be in those meeting minutes or those order books or those judgment books that we just looked at, because it's more in depth than what they want to put in these kind of other books. Those other books you kind of use to find the case files. These case files are what's going to contain that most helpful family history information that we're all looking for. But unfortunately, this is what's most likely not going to be digitized and available online. There are some online, and I'll show you an example of a few. But there's going to be lots and lots and lots and lots of court cases and different case files. Of course, if you think about how many court cases are held each day in each court around the whole United States, that's a lot of court case files. Unfortunately, not every court keeps every single case file. Sometimes you don't get lucky and they, for whatever reason, didn't have that. For example, I had an ancestor who was charged with abusing his wife, and I wanted to read that case file, and I went to the repository that should have had that case file, and they said, unfortunately, we don't have it. We can kind of construct a little bit what happened on those other court records, so I can kind of tell a little bit what happened, if the case was dismissed or if he was charged and had to serve time and things like that. But to read through all the little minute details in that case file, unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore because they can't physically keep every single case file in some cases. What you are going to be finding online, for the most part at this point, is going to relate to the guardianships and the probates, because those tend to be some of the really significant genealogical things that they have prioritized putting online for us to research. And we'll dive deeper again into probate next month, and I'll show you lots of examples there. Case files, of course, there's various sizes. Some might be 5 or 10 pages, some might be 100 pages. It depends on how in-depth that court case was, or what the charge was, or how much paperwork was, produced in the hearing of that case. So it's going to vary every single time. You definitely want to try to get a case file number if you're able to locate it in some resource that I've showed you, or if you're able to see some sort of index offline perhaps. So you might be able to find it in the docket or those minute books or some sort of index. Sometimes they have the indexes online and then the actual case files are going to be offline. Sometimes both the index and the case files are offline. It's again going to depend on what area you're researching, what time period you're researching. And again, if that case file doesn't exist anymore, explore the other types of records to at least get a sense of what happened with that case. So you at least know what happened, but not as much detail as you would have liked, unfortunately. So I've got an example of a guardianship case file from St. Louis County, Missouri. So again, like I mentioned, a lot of the stuff that's going to be online for these case files is going to be those guardianships and those probates. So they usually always start with some sort of like file folder or some sort of kind of like front page where it tells you, the case number, the names of the people involved in it, maybe the date, things like that. And then you can go to the next page, and then this is going to be the first page of that case file. So again, every case file is going to be different. What's going to be in those case files is going to be completely different for every single type. But you can kind of zoom in and read what it says, and it's kind of just basically, appointing this person as a guardian, or them trying to prove that they should be appointed the guardian, or if they're needing to be compensated for that, or things like that. So you can maybe get a signature of a person, for example. And then again, you just go page to page. You can save these. They usually scan the back things because sometimes there would be little notations here, like this is a bond for $100 for somebody. And you just go page to page, and see what's kind of in this case file. You'd have to read through it really in depth to understand what's happening and all the things, and use those legal dictionaries to understand all the various terms you don't know. But if you wanted to save this, of course, they've got the download button right here. That's the little arrow with the line underneath on Family Search. That's the way to download it. So you can, again, keep going page to page. It might be a couple pages or it might be 100 pages. You don't know. Again, it varies every single time with every single case file. I've also got an example of some civil case files from Washington. This is from Garfield County. This is on Ancestry, actually. So Ancestry does have some case files as well. This is through my paid subscription, but they also have some available through the library edition. And I'll show you a little bit when I do a live demonstration of how to find these. I'm just showing you the examples now, and then I'll show you how to find them in just a few minutes. But again, just like the other one, it's got this little file folder to tell you what the case number is, the date, the parties involved, all that fun stuff. And then again, you'd go page by page and see what it is and be able to save it. So to save it, we've got the little wrench icon where you can click download or print, or there's also a save button up here where you can save it to your tree if you're signed into a paid account, or save it to your computer as well. So this one, I don't remember what type of case it was, but it's some sort of civil case. It's a little difficult to read. This person's indebted to somebody for $105. So at that time, that might have been a lot of money for them, and that's why they brought the case. This is an example of one for my ancestors that's available offline. So this is a foreclosure case. So unfortunately, during the Great Depression, they lost their house. So I, got this nice, beautiful case file that's maybe 10, 12, 15 pages long, where I can learn the legal description of that land, what happened, and hear more details about how they lost their house and how they tried to, recoup that money, all that kind of things. So I got this offline at UW Green Bay's Area Research Center, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, but that's kind of a network that the state of Wisconsin has where different regional repositories have various records of the counties that are around that repository. So this is from Oconto County, but I got it at UW Green Bay. Other things you might find, this is an example of a civil case. So you can see how different this looks compared to the foreclosure one. The foreclosure one was nice and flat. I could easily make a copy of it or take pictures of it. This one I had to carefully unfold because it was very folded up. Some of the case files are all really folded up in a huge box, and they're just all kind of folded up like that. And you just have to carefully unfold them and try your best to take a copy of it or take a picture of it. So it's going to depend on the different repositories and how they can store things like this. And I'm fortunate that they had these case files and didn't destroy them all, because this, even if it's folded and hard to read and stuff and hard to unfold, I can still at least get a copy of it or see what happened. So this is a case where my ancestor sued somebody because he stole his threshing machine. So that was something he needed for his, farming, that, that was his livelihood. So of course he's gonna bring this person to court over that. Questions so far on what we've seen? Right now, you do not have to make an appointment for UW Green Bay at the Area Research Center. Some of them do require appointments, or they like to know in advance. Like if you have a case number, or you want to say, hey, I want to look at the court records for Oconto County or whatever, at least kind of give them a heads up, and then they can have that stuff ready. And then you don't have to sit and wait for them to go find it in the back and grab that stuff for you. Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes you might need to make an appointment at the various places. Definitely call ahead, make sure that they have those records first before you just show up, because you might be disappointed. Someone's wondering, how do you get access to children in an orphanage? because parents couldn't afford to take care of their children in Ohio, I would start with like the Ohio Historical Society or the Ohio Genealogical Society and see where they house those types of records. I'm not super familiar with researching that in Ohio, but I know at Wisconsin, we have those types of records in the Wisconsin Historical Society. Either Green Bay or Madison, yeah.
Well, how would you know which one?
Call them for sure. It depends where in the state, if it's a state-run one or if it's a county-run one, that's going to determine where the records are held. Because there are various types of orphanages. Someone said, for finding early adoption records, check the clerk of circuit court in the county that the adoption took place. A Wikipedia page or the Family Search Wiki is going to give you contact information for the county. So, and then Emily shared another link for Ohio adoption research, so thank you. Any other questions here? Where are the docket books? I will show you in just a second the ones that are available online and how to get them. All right, so some are digitized and available online. That's the great part. Like, we all love to just research in our pajamas at home for free when we can. So one of the great places that you can start is going to be at Family Search. So we saw a lot of the examples I just showed you were almost all on Family Search, except for that the few that were offline or the one that was on Ancestry. They have about 300 various collections for probate records and court records. Plus, they have lots of additional unindexed stuff, meaning you can't just type in your ancestor's name and pull it up. You got to look at a different part of the website in order to find that stuff. And I'm going to show you in just a second how to do that. All right, so you're going to log into your Family Search account. If you don't already have an account, you can create a free one, but you want to make sure you're signed into that account first before you start researching. Once you're signed in, if you click on search and go to records, that will bring you to the main kind of search area where you can start searching. You can type in your ancestor's name and, you know, start looking. You can put in some details here. If you click on more options, you can click on birth, marriage, death, whatever you want to, or put in a spouse name or parent's name or whatever. Just to keep it general, I'm just going to click search just to show you. And here it's going to show you a bunch of different results for a bunch of different collections. Well, we just want to look at court collections at this point. So what you can do is you can click over here on collection, and you can see they kind of break it down by category. So these are the birth, marriage, and death. These are the censuses and other lists. There's a migration and naturalization. There's a military one. There's other collections, and then there's one that's probate and court. So what you can do is you can click on this, all the probate and court ones, and you want to make sure to click this blue button down here that says apply the collection filter. So it knows I want to just narrow it down to just those. And now I can see the various things, like here's some tax stuff or some other miscellaneous records. Obviously, the more details I put in this search box that are more relevant to my ancestors, the more relevant these results are going to be. Anytime you see a little camera with a camera icon, that means you can view it. These ones are usually just indexed. So if I click on it, you can kind of see that's all there is to the record. Or sometimes they might have that original document where I can click on it and see, oh, this comes from a specific microfilm, but it might be slightly off. So if I click on view image, it might not be the one that has John Smith on it. I might need to go a page or two before, or 5 or 6 before, or 5 or 6 after. But if you kind of look at it, you can zoom in and see all the various names here. So, you know, you can scroll through as you wish, but somewhere in here that ancestor's name is going to be. That's not all the only place where you can get these types of court records. This is only if they're indexed, essentially. So there's a couple other places you can go. If we go back to that search and that records area, there's also a spot here that you can find a collection. So you can start typing in court and see, oh, there's Alabama and Jefferson County, there's circuit court papers, or there's Madison County Chancery and circuit court records, or various things. You can even put in a specific state, like if I want Virginia, and then I can put court. Maybe a docket, maybe not. Well, you can see what there might be. You know, it might be different named things, or they might be just in a general kind of thing. Like I can see, oh, there's county marriage records or cemetery records or divorce records there. So that's another place that you can look. There's also in the catalog. So if we go to search and go to catalog, this is also where you can put in a specific place. So you can put in a specific country, a specific state, a specific county, or a specific city in that area. So for example, I could type in United States, if I could type right, and Virginia, and I want to click that, and then I click search, and now I can see all these various categories of records. So you can see biographies, Bible records, census records, cemetery records, etc., etc. Well, there's a spot for court records. So I can see there's 60 different collections in Virginia of court records. So some of these might be books that are available offline at the Family Search Library in Salt Lake City. Some of them might be microfilm that are available online, and you can just breeze through it and kind of skim through, see if there's an index for that person, and then find out what page within those records that might be. Or maybe that index is online and then the actual records are offline. Again, it's going to vary depending on every single area and what they have available online and what they have offline. But you can see there's things like, oh, here's a court order book. So now I can look at it and I can see down here, if I see this little camera with the little camera icon, I can click on that. And now we brought into this record. So I can click on it and then start exploring it. If I can see maybe there's an index at the beginning, or maybe there's an index at the end, I can kind of skim through it a little bit and see if it seems like there's an index. It doesn't seem like there is. So if I have an ancestor who's living in this area, I might want to, you know, make a cup of coffee and sit down for a while and skim through it and see if I can find them in this specific time period. But it might be more difficult to find them again because it's not all indexed at this point. You can see there's all different various records and different record types here related to court cases that you can find. So like that was just the docket or the order books. There's different court record orders. There's duplicates of records. There's abstracts of records. There's all this kind of great miscellaneous court records. There's order books. I mean, it's going to vary depending on that specific location that you're looking for. There's also going to be unindexed stuff. So this might be linking you to some microfilm. There's also another spot under this search and going to images where you can find even more unindexed stuff. So this is where you can again put in that place name. It could be as general as United States, or I could put in Appleton, Wisconsin in here. You can click search once you put in that place name. And it's of course going to give you all these types of records that are related to that specific location. I can narrow it down over here by a specific state. There's also a spot called life event. So this is where I'd want to go first. And you can see there's a legal one, there's military service, there's migration, there's birth, there's divorce, there's religious, there's all these types of things, adoption, poor relief. I mean, I can click on one of these and I can see all the various records that are underneath this legal thing. So maybe I just want to look at civil case files, or maybe I just want to look at the dockets or the minutes that might be related to that. The important part is once you uncheck or check these boxes is to click update, because now you can see that 2 million or whatever records, it's now down to 1.3. And now I can click over here if I want to look at California, for example. Now I'm down to 21,000. Well, maybe I know the different county that I'm looking at. Maybe I'm looking at Alameda County. So now I can see, oh, here's some court petitions for this specific time period. Here's some tax records for this specific time period. Here's a bunch of different probate records. Sometimes over here, it might tell you the name of the people that are involved in it, but it's usually not completely indexed at this point. So if you see something that's like, hey, I want to look at these wills from 1902 because my ancestor lived in that area, I would click on it over here And then it's going to bring me into the images for that. Well, this one's a very small collection here. It looks like family trees instead of wills, but that's what it says. So sometimes it's maybe not always 100% accurate of what it's linking you to. So we'll try a different one. So maybe we'll get these probate records. So again, you can look through and see all the various ones, you know, see what page might be related to your ancestor, or skim through them and then save them. You'd be able to save them right up here. So that's one spot where you can find them, or 4 or 5 different spots where you can find them on Family Search. Again, available for free. Remember, if you see this little icon that has the camera, but it has a key on top, that means it's a restricted collection. So you might click on that little icon at home and try to pull up these images, and then you get this that says, oh, there's an error loading the images, but it will tell you, you can either access the site at a Family Search Center or access the site at an affiliate library. And if you click on where it says Family Search Center or Family Search Affiliate Library, it's going to bring you to a little search area where you can figure out where the closest one is to you. So us at Appleton Public Library, for those people in Appleton, we are an affiliate library. We also have Family Search Center in Appleton that's open, you know, limited hours during the week where you could come and explore these records. So then this is what this collection is going to look like when you come to the library and try to view it. Now that key is gone, that means the collection's unlocked. I can click on it just like I did with any other collection from home and be brought into those records and be able to view them and save them and print them or do whatever I want with them at that point. Another great place to try to locate your ancestors is going to be through Ancestry Library Edition. So they have almost 900 worldwide collections in our free library edition. Unfortunately, you do have to come into the library to use it for free if you do want to. If you do have a paid edition of Ancestry, they do have a little bit more collections, of course. They have about 1,500 or just over 1,500 collections, with about 1,000 of those being US-based ones. It's a lot of wills, a lot of probates, some prison records. So not a whole ton of court cases, but there are some that have those case files or those various records like we looked at earlier. So here's kind of a snapshot of some of the different collections types they have in the Ancestry Library Edition when you narrow down by court, land, wills, and financial. So you can kind of see over here, there's, you know, 200 and some collections that are dealing with wills, estates, and guardian records. There's 500 some that are dealing with court, government, or criminal records, the various land records, tax records, and you can see kind of the names of the different collections that they have. And then again, be able to explore those for free in the library if you come use that library edition. The paid edition, I'm going to show you how to get to something like this court case that we looked at earlier. So if you're signed into your paid subscription, if you go up to search and click on card catalog, I feel like this is probably the easiest way to get there unless you get it as a hint for your ancestor, which I wouldn't bank on getting hints on court cases, but you never know. So once you get to the card catalog, I would use these filters on the left-hand side. So right here, you can see there's one that's called Court, Land, Wills, and Financial. So I can click on that. I can even click down further to get to the court, governmental, and criminal records. So now I can see the various record names. Up here, I can sort it by the different collection title names, when it was last updated, or record count. So I can see the largest collections first, for example. Some of them, you know, are kind of interesting, like, hey, here's dog license registrations for Ireland, or workhouse admission and discharge records. Well, how does that deal with court stuff? Well, it does. Again, remember, sometimes we might find our ancestor in those weird kind of registration things. So that court case I showed you earlier was part of this Washington County record. So that doesn't obviously tell me, hey, this is a court record, but if I click on it, I can learn a little bit more. It just says it includes county records from Washington. Well, that's super helpful. But if I look over here, I can choose what county. So maybe I'm going to choose what county my ancestor lived in. And then I can see the various types of records that are within that county. So I can see, oh, there's birth records on here. There's civil case files on here. A lot of them for various years. There's death records. There's going to be declarations and petitions for those naturalizations. There's going to be some estate case files, lots of them. Lots more naturalization stuff. Lots more naturalization stuff, different wills in here. So again, I could just, these aren't indexed. So I would have to click on the different time period and then breeze through them. So again, you can see kind of that beginning case file here. I can kind of scroll through down here and see maybe when the next case file starts. So you can kind of get like a little snapshot down here, and you might need to click on it and see, okay, is this still part of that first case or is it the next case? So usually, again, you kind of see this kind of file folder as kind of the marker that, hey, it's the next case. You can look up here and see, oh, it's the state of Washington or the territory of Washington versus this person. And then, start going through that case file again and seeing what it is. Again, you can save it up here, or using the little wrench icon, you can save or print it as well. So just going to be various things depending on, what's digitized and available online. Unfortunately, not every state has all the stuff online at this point, because again, there's lots of different case files that there are going to be. But hopefully you're lucky and you find some for your ancestors that are online, especially in those places like Washington where you can't easily get to research them in person. There are just a few on Heritage Quest. So we looked at Heritage Quest earlier when we looked at those county boundaries. If you look down here, there's some for North Carolina and some for Ohio. So if you have North Carolina or Ohio ancestors in these specific counties, they've got a couple of court records for specific time periods, where again, you can access that for free on Heritage Quest. So to get there, you'd again start at our library's website if you are in Wisconsin. You'd click on eLibrary. You'd click on genealogy to narrow it down to just our genealogy ones. And then you'd click on Heritage Quest to be brought right into Heritage Quest. And then to find these, you'd click on search. It's going to bring you, like you can see, wills and probates is one that's easily called out. So you can search a lot of wills and probates, which we'll dive deeper into next month. But to get to all those other miscellaneous court records, you can see court records isn't one of the options here. So I can look at down here where it says searching in other locations. I can look at the various different countries or continents that they might have different records for, but there's also a spot for more US records. And then what I did was I did Control and F on my computer, and it brings up this little search box here. And then what I did was I typed in the word court, and now I can see here it's going to highlight on the page where that specific word is on the page. So now I can see, oh, here's this civil action court papers for North Carolina. I can use the little arrow to move on to the next little instance, or I can just scroll through and see where they have it highlighted on my page for that specific search term. And you can use this little search box for any specific term you want to. Like I could put in birth here and see all the different birth records, for example, or I can put in a person's name if I wanted to. And you might see if there's results or not. It's going to look just like Ancestry Library Edition, where you'd be able to log in and save or print those case files if you wanted to. There's also a site called MyHeritage. That's another one that requires a paid subscription, but they have 93 different collections in court records. It's primarily going to be stuff from the United States and from European countries. I don't have a MyHeritage, so I can't show you that, unfortunately, but if that's something that you wanted to look into, if you think they might be available on there, you can go ahead and explore. Again, like I said earlier, most of the stuff that you're going to find online at this point is going to be probate records, guardianships, and naturalizations, because those are the most types of cases that are those genealogy, super genealogy important ones that they want to prioritize putting online for all of us genealogists. But you might find things like those docket books, those minute books, those judgment and order books, and then a few case files that might be something lucky that you find that have been digitized and put online at this point already. But remember, what you see online is a super, super small portion of what's available in those court records, because so many of them are offline. That's why the majority of the examples I showed you were all not my ancestors. Again, the completeness of what is going to be in those records is going to vary depending on the different jurisdictions. Again, I always suggest that you start with that Family Search Wiki, put in that state name, put in court records just like we did earlier. So again, you'd go to Family Search Wiki and you'd put in that various state's name. So again, I could type in something like, hold on, clicked on the wrong thing quick. All right, so you could type in New York court records. If I'm like, hey, I've never searched in New York court records, I want to learn a little bit of an overview. Now I can see the various online resources that they might have. If I see a little dollar sign, that means it's something that usually requires a paid subscription to completely access it. But it might tell you where it is, like it might be on Ancestry. Then I know, oh, I should get an Ancestry membership or come to the library, see if I can get it in the library edition for free. I can see all the different various backgrounds and, give me information about the different types of courts, the different types of crimes that they might have dealt with, what the trial process was. So again, some of them are very, very specific and detailed and give you a lot of great background information, depending on what area you're searching in. And again, you can do this any state, any country, you can put that in and learn a little bit more. There's also a spot in here in all of those entries that is called Archives and Libraries section. So if I go back to the New York court records, if you look over here on the right-hand side, you can see there's different record types. So, oh, that person earlier who was asking about adoption in Ohio, I could go to the Ohio page and then click on adoption and be brought into there. There's also a spot, like I just mentioned, down here where it says local research resources. So the first one is going to be the archives and libraries. So if I'm like, oh, I'm not finding a New York case that I'm looking for, I need to figure out what archive or what library holds that. I would click on that, and then it's going to bring me to the page where it's going to tell me all the various repositories. There might be some online ones or some offline ones. It's going to give me a little description of what they might have in there, like, oh, there's the National Archives or the New York Public Library or this specific society or the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society or New York Historical Society. So you can see kind of a little snapshot of what they might have. It's going to link you to their website, give you their address, their phone number, contact information where you could reach out to them and say, hey, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z, and see if they can do something for you from a distance. Or if you're like, hey, I want to plan a trip to New York, this is where I want to go research when I'm in New York. So again, you can do this with every single state, every single country in Family Search Wiki. So you can see, for example, the New York State Archives would hold state court records, and then they've got a New York City Municipal Archives that holds New York City specific court records, for example, if I dived a little deeper into that archives and library section. So it's going to tell you where to follow up offline. So like we kind of just saw on that Wikipedia page, a lot of those court records that are going to be offline are often in those state archives. But they might still have the original records that are at the county level. So it again is going to depend on the various areas you're researching and what time period. So sometimes they might keep a certain amount at the courthouse, and then the other older ones might go to an archive or some sort of historical society for further long-term preservation. The records might be on microfilm, they might be in the original paper form, they might be in bound volumes. It's going to be a mixed bag, again, depending on the jurisdiction and how they're being preserved. So like I showed you earlier, the different foreclosure one that was nice and flat, it was in a folder. The other one that was a civil case was all folded up and really, hard to unfold and get it flat. So you might get something like that, or you might get something that's in a huge bound volume that you might have to flip through the big pages and find your ancestor in. Sometimes they might store stuff off-site because maybe they don't have enough room in their repository to house every single thing. So I always recommend calling them before, making sure you don't need an appointment, or if you do need an appointment, making sure they actually have those files that you're looking for instead of, you driving 2 hours and then finding out, oh, you're at the wrong place. We don't have that stuff. Do yourself a favor and don't make that unnecessary trip. Give them a call first and verify. They could also, like I said, potentially pull a case file for you if you already found a case number or you know a specific time period where you're searching. They could maybe have that stuff ready for you. If you say, hey, I'm going to be here at 10 o'clock on Wednesday, they can have that ready for you and you can just get to work right away instead of having to wait, 10 minutes maybe before they pull all the stuff and bring it to you. Again, they might have some indexes online. It's going to help you save time when you're going offline. If you already have that notation of what the case file is or what date you're looking at or the specific types of case files that you're looking for. So some other ways you can locate the existence of court cases might be in newspapers. So we talked about newspapers a couple months ago. But maybe this is a great place where you can learn things like, hey, there's a burglary charge against this person. And now I can locate and see if there's a case file that still exists. And I wanted to point out, like the main part of this article is about my, great Uncle John. But down below, you see there's actually just one little paragraph that says another case was brought up before Justice Fisher yesterday of Archie so-and-so and Mrs. William so-and-so charged with adultery. Well, if that was my ancestor, like I might have just missed this because I just skimmed the headline and didn't notice, hey, there's like a little paragraph that's completely unrelated to the rest of this article that might be that person that you're looking for. So be sure, that's a great thing that if the newspaper is digitized, that you search it and search that name and maybe find the existence of a court case that's going to tell you a little bit more about how to get this court case, or that there's one at this specific time period. If they were involved in something really lengthy or something really newsworthy, like a brother of John, Henry, he was another sassy one, he declared that moonshine was the cause for him committing a crime. So he's got a lengthy rap sheet. This is just one of his court cases that he was involved in, and I can see he appeared before this circuit judge, so now I know what time period, and it says he received a sentence of 2 years at a state penitentiary in Waupun. Well, now I know he served time. I should follow up with that prison record in Waupun. And then the next paragraph, it says, oh, he was just released from Minnesota. So I know I got to go to Minnesota too and get another record because he just loved to, get in trouble. So, sometimes you get colorful people like that, and this might link you to, hey, there's a lot of little leads I have to follow up on in order to find all the court records available. Again, don't forget that your library card, we have access to a lot of those free newspaper databases that we talked about a couple months ago when we did our newspaper session. So refer back to that recording and look at all those various resources that we have. And there's also usually a legal notices section in the newspaper. So sometimes they might list things like the probate records, which we'll dive into further. This one's talking about a foreclosure notice. So this is, linking you to, hey, this person that maybe I'm searching for had to have their house foreclosed on. Now I know during this time period, I need to look in those court cases and see if I can figure out more of what happened and get that case file. If you've got a criminal, so here's John. He's the one who forged stuff and served. He served in a federal penitentiary. I've heard so many stories about him growing up. Unfortunately, he died when I was very young, so I never got to meet him. But if you get his prison record like I did, you get a mugshot. I can see his mugshot. I can read through his prison file and see if he was a model prisoner or not, and who was visiting him, who was writing him letters, all this kind of cool stuff. Again, a lot of these are going to be offline. So this one, since it was a federal prison that he served with, I had to go through the National Archives to get it, but I just did it over the phone, and within like a week or two, I got it and paid for it, and I've got it, and I can skim through it now and read all about his fun prison stuff. He was a very good prisoner. Yeah, he learned his lesson. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was his brother who was the moonshine one. They were both double trouble. That's what I like to call them. There's also this really great site called Black Sheep Ancestors that will link you to a couple resources like prison records or court cases. So I'll just show you quick. It's just blacksheepancestors.com. They've got a couple international collections, a couple of Canadian, a couple UK ones. They've got US ones, of course, where you can see the various states, for example. So I can, scroll down and click on Wisconsin. And I can see, oh, here's, a listing of the 1930 prisoners that were in the Wisconsin State Reformatory. I can see information on Waupun. So maybe, Henry's in here because this is, his time period where he's being sassy. Or I could see, oh, Douglas County or the different prisoners or what else they've got. They've got some insane asylum records, linking you to more information on the different court records that might be here. So you can, again, click on all these resources and, see where they're going to bring you. Again, this is a free site, so it's going to maybe give you some ads occasionally, but now you can scroll through or do that Control F and then type in that ancestor's name and see, oh, there they are, or learn a little bit more about, what record they might have in there for that person. Just briefly, I mentioned divorce records. So we kind of talked about these a little bit during our vital records talk all the way at the beginning of the year. But again, I would start with that family search wiki. I would type in, where those records are held, like Wisconsin divorce records, and see some information about where I would go to access those or what online indexes or online records there might be for divorce records. You're more likely to find some more divorce records online or maybe at least an index than you will offline. But again, a lot of them might be offline. The level of detail in those cases is going to vary case by case basis. Sometimes, again, that case file might be mostly typed, or it might be all handwritten, especially those really, really old ones, or it might be a mixture of both. Again, check family search, check ancestry. Those resources we just talked about the court records. You can also find some divorce records on there, or at least the indexes on there. Try to locate that file number if you can. So like this one, I know the file number is 1599. So when I went to the UW Green Bay archives, I knew that from looking at a different index that was, the case number I was looking for. So in Wisconsin, our older divorces are usually going to be within those circuit court records, and those are going to be held at the area research centers, which are at UW colleges all around the state, depending on what county it was in. So this one, for example, was in Outagamie County. So I know by looking at the map of all the different UW archives that Outagamie County records are held at UW Green Bay. So that's where I had to go to get this case. If you're looking for anything newer than a certain time period, and I'll show you how to figure out what time periods are covered in the archives, those newer ones are going to be still at the county. So again, each state might handle things different, but this is how we handle it in Wisconsin. And you can look at the websites of the various area research centers to see what time period of records they have. And I'll show you that in just a second. They also have things like indexes. So like this is one that Ancestry Library Edition has. It's a Wisconsin divorce records one. So I put in my ancestor's name and I see what date they divorced in. Unfortunately, this one that just said Wisconsin, well, that doesn't help me. I need to know what county in Wisconsin they divorced in. But I can easily use other resources, like this was in 1929. Well, I could look at the 1930 census, see where he's living, and then see if that's where they divorced in, or see if I can find a city directory that would tell me where they were living in 1929, where they might have gotten divorced. Or I would start with what county they were married in. Maybe they also got divorced in that county as well. So there's different little tips and tricks or leads you might need to investigate until you find the actual one. But this gives me a certificate number, which I could take to the area research center once I know that it's in Winnebago County, for example, and then find it. So this is a map of the area research centers. So I've got a link in your handout for you, but you can see it's kind of got all the different colored counties and then a little star of where it is on the map. So you kind of need to know a little bit of Wisconsin geography or pull up a map of Wisconsin to kind of decode it. But you can see the star represents UW Green Bay, and all the various green ones around it are all the records that are held there. This star represents Oshkosh, and then all the black ones are the ones that are represented there. Stevens Point, all the records that are there, et cetera, et cetera. So that link that I've got in your handout will bring you to this map. And then you can actually see as well, there's links here to all the various schools. So I could, for example, click on Whitewater if I'm like, oh, I think this is where I need to research. And now I'm brought into that area research center's website where I can see there's a genealogy section. I can click on it and see oh, there's various tabs. Here's ones for court records. So I can see, click on here and see, oh, they've got these various dates. They've got none for Jefferson County. I have to contact the courthouse for that. But if I'm looking at Walworth County for this time period, I know that they have those records there at UW-Whitewater, for example. And then quickly, I just want to show you UW Green Bay's site, since Outagamie County, that's where we are in Appleton for the most part. So they've got a great website here. You can click and see right here, they've got their genealogy and local history section right here. And then it's going to give you an overview of the different counties and what types of records and then what dates they have. So you can kind of scroll through and see the various counties and what records they have. And you can see here, there's also a spot where you can request a search. So that's something where you could, pay for them to do a search for you if you're not able to look for yourself. Well, they've also got some online indexes. So if you click on online index, it's going to bring you here. And you can just type in that ancestor's name. So I'm going to put in that one. You can select what county if you want to. Or you can just select a specific collection. So they've got citizenship records, they've got court cases, they've got maps, they've got some Belgian pedigree charts, and then probate records. Of course, not everything is indexed for all of the places, but for example, for those court case files, I can click on that and click search. Now it's going to be extra slow for me. All right, so now I can see Henry's back at it again. This time he's in Shawano County in 1918. If I click on more info, I can see, oh, he's a defendant in the case, big surprise, and it's for burglary. All right, great. So now I've got a box number, I've got a folder number, I've got what series it is, so I can, call the archives and say, hey, I want to look at this file, I got to figure out what Henry's doing, and they'll have it ready for me when I get there. Yeah, so that's UW Green Bay. So again, they're going to have various counties around Green Bay, including Outagamie County. That one was for Shawano County, though, because that's also included in the Green Bay Area Research Center. So I did that same thing. I went to the archives and I looked up Henry's case, and sure enough, he stole a car from somebody. So this is the whole case file. It's only 10 pages long, but I can skim through it and read all about how, at 10 o'clock in the morning or something, he was arrested, and this is what time he did his crime, and how he's, accused of doing it, and what his defense was, and all this kind of great, cool information. So this one's, thankfully pretty easy to read because it's mostly typed, but I save you the juicy details of reading through it all. But you can see, he was, found guilty and had to serve some time for it. So again, you never know what kind of juicy details you're going to get in here. But that's, that's a short case file, but it's an example of what you might be able to find offline. I also recommend, if you've got somebody like Henry, create a timeline. So I found all the different newspaper articles and I started putting it on a timeline. Like you can see, June 1923, he's, blaming moonshine. In November, he's, getting in trouble. He's, implicated with somebody else in passing forged checks, just like his brother. He liked to, counterfeit stuff too. He's jailed in, this time. He tried to break out of jail at a certain point. He tried to make a key out of soap. So that was fun to find. He's charged with attempted murder at a certain point. So he's got a lengthy rap sheet where I had to start creating a timeline and making notes for myself of what Henry was doing, where he is, what court records I need to find, what prison records I need to find in order to locate his life of crime. So, yeah. Poor guy. Yeah, I agree.
Nobody talked about him about anything else.
I'm sure he was a nice guy, but one last resource I wanted to show you was this court resources by state that's through the Justice Department. So this is one of the last links in your handout, where you can see there's all the various states, and then these numbered ones are going to be the various districts. So where they would hear those federal court cases. So, if they're in Iowa, for example, they'd be in the 8th district, for example. But you can, for example, click on, whatever state you wanted to look at. And then it's going to talk to you about all the various courts and give you links to all the various courts as well. So this is Minnesota. I can see that they're part of the 8th Circuit Appellate Court. I can see the link to the District of Minnesota for the district courts. I can see the bankruptcy courts. Here's all the Supreme Court stuff, the Court of Appeals, the different tax courts or lower courts. These are all links, again, I can click on to learn a little bit more about those cases in this specific area. So there's links to all the various states on here if you just click on this map, or you can click on the state name down here as well. Again, our next session is going to be all about probate records. So we're diving a lot deeper into that specific court record. It's going to be on October 22nd at 1 p.m. In the meantime, on October 14th at 2 p.m. Central, on Zoom, we're going to be talking all about the resources that are at the National Personnel Records Center. So if you remember back to our military presentation, I talked about how they have a lot of really great military resources. They've also got some civilian stuff. So if you had an ancestor who worked for the federal government, like they were a postmaster or something like that, they would also have these records here. So she's going to talk about the various records and how to get access to those records. So if you want to learn more about researching that specific repository, definitely feel free to join us on Zoom or catch the recording of it afterwards. And that's what I've got for you. If you really want, I can also show you John's prison file. I did save it on my computer if you want to look through it quick, just to see what a prison file looks like. He wasn't as naughty as his brother, but so this is what I got from the National Archives. It's 72 pages. So again, we've got that awesome mugshot. I only have pictures of him when he's older. So this is the youngest picture I have of him, other than when he was a really young boy with the rest of the family. Again, kind of like all the other case files, you've got that kind of folder. This is my mom's side of the family. So kind of a little bit. I mean, he looks a little bit like my grandpa and his dad. So yeah. But he was also a nice guy. He built birdhouses for my mom. And, I remember hearing cute stories like that. But, at one time he decided he needed some more money. So he decided to make his own. So you can see, all this information about when he was sentenced, where he was arrested, where he was living, all this stuff. He also served in the state penitentiary for a time period. You can see this is, my great grandpa. This is his brother. You can see all the stuff, what is mail stuff. I mean, progress report, you can see, all about his physical description. Yeah, I mean, there's all these kind of little weird, like, oh my gosh, like, I wouldn't even think that this would be in a prison record, but it's in here. I know it talks about his parents at some point in here. So, I mean, those are my, second great grandparents. So I'm happy to learn more about them and you can see certain things like, oh, after parole, I'm gonna live with my brother. And he did. You can see other people that are in charge of making sure he's gonna stay on the straight and narrow. And see, it's got information like his dad died at age 40. He didn't remember his mom apparently because he didn't write her name down. He's got some adopted parents in here. His siblings are listed there. So again, you can see all these, great little family history details and what their occupations were and, his marital status, like he was married briefly and all that kind of great stuff. Occupational history. I mean, it goes in depth with certain things. This is, again, 72 pages worth of stuff here. So we've got, when he was admitted and all this previous criminal record stuff. So I can, again, find out more naughty stuff he did. All this kind of great stuff that you can find. So yeah, those are the kind of things that you can find in a federal prison record.
How long did he live?
He was like 90, I think, when he died. So, I mean, but this was the 1940s, late 1930s, I think, when he was arrested. And I can't quite remember off the top of my head how long he served, but it wasn't as long as I would have thought that he would have had to serve for.
He was on the straight and narrow the last 50 years.
He was, yeah. Like I said, I heard lots of great stories about him, but lots of fun stories. So yeah, does anybody have any questions? Let's see if there's any questions online.
When ancestors are deported, where would that be?
I would feel like deporting would be through the federal courts. Yeah. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head for sure, but that's where my guess would be federal courts.
Okay.
Let's see if there's any other questions in here. All right.
My husband's family.
Thank you, Roberta. Well, thanks. Does Ancestry Library Edition allow a patron to see public trees if you don't have a subscription? Yes, it does. You can see the trees on the library edition, but you cannot contact the person. You can at least see them, but you can't contact them on the library edition.
It really does have a lot more, I was in.
Yeah, you can, like I said, I've used the library edition for international records because I don't want to pay for an international subscription of Ancestry. It's like $300. So come use the library edition for free.
I wish I had some of the courts.
Yeah, I wish more court stuff was online, but let's see.
A lot of different traditions then.
All right, during World War II, my father's parents filed for divorce. Weekly newspaper accounts are quite detailed. Wife's stepfather testified that she brought men around and then left for California. Guess everything said in court made it to the paper. Yeah. Yeah, you can find a lot of juicy details in the newspaper and in the court records. Sometimes you don't even need the court record to hear all the juicy stuff in the newspaper, depending on what time period.
The people who live there.
Yeah, you gotta laugh about those double trouble ancestors. I need her own research assistant. Yes, I do. That'd be great. Who wants to volunteer? Thank you.
A question for you.
All right, just one second.
Wisconsin's got all
Thank
those-
you, everyone.
Wisconsin